If you think poker night at the inventory is just a little poker game with jokes, I totally get you. I felt the same way at first. But the truth is, behind the humor and the taunts, there's a game of no-limit Texas Hold'em with rising blinds and an extra objective that changes everything. When a character goes bust and puts up an item as a buy-in, winning the tournament isn't enough. You have to be the one to eliminate the item's owner to claim the reward. So, in today's video, I'm going to give you 10 advanced tips I wish I'd heard before I started. I'm Mary, and the video starts right now.
Whoa! Look who's wearing the daddy pants.
Keeping an eye on Strong Bad's eyes isn't just a visual detail. It's practically an emotional cheat the game puts right in your face. When you notice his eyelids are half closed with that "I'm the king of the table" look, it's almost guaranteed he came prepared with a hand too strong for any weak bluffs. When Strong Bad has a powerhouse hand, he loves to project this air of exaggerated confidence, almost daring you to stay in the play. The half-closed eyes, the smirk, and lines like, "You're gonna fold," or "I'm totally in this hand," are all part of the same pack. He wants you to feel uncomfortable, so he intensifies the pressure precisely because he knows he has an ace up his sleeve. In these moments, calling or even raising a heavy bet is a much bigger risk than you might imagine. On the other hand, the detail of him slamming his fist on the table before betting is a classic, obvious bluff for the character. Instead of staying calm, he tries too hard to look more aggressive than necessary, as if he's trying to scare everyone into folding. This type of gesture fits his mocking personality. He knows he's lying, and instead of hiding it, tries to turn the bluff into a spectacle. Whenever I see that fist hit the table, I automatically think he's trying to compensate for a lack of strength in his hand. Mastering Strong Bad's tell is like learning to read a friend who always lies the same way. When you notice he's acting overconfident, it's a sign he's holding something dangerous. When he gets too excited and hits the armrest or the table, that's when you take a deep breath, hold your nerve, and decide whether to face him or fold. Using this correctly not only builds your chip stack, but also makes the game much more fun because you feel like you're playing him, not just drawing random cards. This tip against the heavy is one of those that seems simple but works precisely because it messes with his pride at the table. I like it because it doesn't just depend on luck. It depends on understanding the character's personality and using it to your advantage. The heavy isn't a completely crazy player, he's usually solid, but he has a very clear weak point. When the betting starts to climb, he can turn the hand into an ego trip. The most interesting part is that the tip doesn't tell you to go all in at once, but rather to play with patience. Instead of dropping a massive bet and scaring the guy off, the idea is to make small, gradual raises, almost as if you're pulling the heavy into the pot without him realizing it. I think this is cool because it gives you the feeling that you're not just winning on the cards, but also through emotional control. And with the heavy, this fits perfectly because he has that posture of strength and presence, wanting to impose himself at all times. So when you make these smaller raises, he might interpret it as a chance to show firmness and be the man of the table, getting deeper and deeper into the betting war. In practice, it's like taunting without looking like you're taunting, which makes the trap even better. To me, the secret to this tip is not being in a hurry and letting the heavy build his own mistake. You don't need to face the character with brutality. The best path is simply letting him get emotional on his own and turn the round into a war that perhaps didn't even need to happen. It's the kind of play I find most satisfying in poker, when you realize you won not because you pressed a button at the right time, but because you read your opponent like an open book. Eliminating Tycho early is one of the most valuable things you can do, because he's the type of player who seems harmless at first, but is actually just waiting for the right moment to turn the game around. I really like this type of reading because it rewards those who pay attention to the rhythm of the match, not just the cards in their hand. Against Tycho, the feeling is almost this. If you let him get comfortable for too long, eventually he stops observing and starts commanding the table. His danger lies precisely in this shift in posture throughout the match. In the beginning, he plays tighter and more disciplined, so many people end up underestimating the threat, thinking he's just having bad luck or being too conservative. However, this initial profile is what makes everything more treacherous, because when other players start to fall, he gains more room to pressure, bluff, speed up the pace, and make you doubt decisions that seemed simple before. That's why I see this tip almost as a survival rule. If the chance to take Tycho out early arises, it's well worth considering. With a full table, his attention is still divided among others. The chaos is spread out and you can work your readings better. But when the game narrows down and there's more room for him to breathe, he starts looking like that player who is always one step ahead, mixing aggression with unpredictability in a very irritating way. The most interesting part is that this tip conveys a very real sense of psychological poker. Sometimes the best target isn't the loudest or most exaggerated one, but the quiet guy who is laying the groundwork to dominate later. And honestly, I think that's very cool about Tycho, because beating him early gives you the impression that you nipped the problem in the bud before the table turned into a nightmare. Max is probably the most frustrating character to read at the entire table, and this tip captures exactly why. With strong bad, you watch the eyes. With the heavy, you work the ego. With Tycho, you eliminate early. But with Max, there is no manual. He's the kind of player who seems to be playing a completely different game than yours, and the worst thing you can do is try to find logic where none exists. The trick to this tip is accepting that unpredictability instead of fighting it. When you start trying to analyze Max's patterns, you're wasting time and energy on something that simply isn't there. He might go all in on a terrible hand because he thought it was funny, and he might fold a strong hand because he had a random thought in the middle of the play. Trying to predict this is like trying to guess the next move of someone who decided to play with their eyes closed. So, the strategy of calling to see makes absolute sense here. You don't need a spectacular hand to face Max, you just need something minimally decent and the courage to hold the call calmly. Since he bluffs so much, often for no concrete reason, you'll catch him empty-handed much more often than you'd expect. Your hand doesn't have to be the best of the night because the person on the other side could very well be betting with nothing just on impulse. To me, Max is that reminder that poker isn't just calculation. Sometimes the best decision is simply to stop overthinking and just react with what you have. Against a chaotic player, balance and patience are worth more than any strategic reading. And there's something very satisfying about holding a firm call, opening the cards, and seeing that yes, Max was bluffing with nothing once again. Strong Bad is one of those players who hates going unnoticed and loves trying to trick you. His posture is always that of someone who wants to impress you. So when you notice he's betting big, the first thing that should cross your mind is suspicion. But here's the trick. If you have a decent hand after the flop, don't be afraid to face him or even raise his bet. The mistake is just calling passively. You need to show firmness so that he thinks twice before continuing to bluff. What makes it easier is that Strong Bad has very obvious tells if you pay attention to his face. When he has a truly good hand, he can't hide his satisfaction. His eyes get half closed with that smug look of someone who thinks they've already won. It's almost an invitation for you to fold because he wants you to believe you're going up against something unbeatable. In these moments, hold back the urge to call everything he bets, because the chance he's holding real cards is very high. Now, if you see him slamming his fist on the table before playing or during the bet, you can celebrate internally, because that is practically a neon sign saying, "I'm bluffing." It's as if he's trying to compensate for the lack of hand strength with extra physical aggression. The fist on the table is a desperate move to appear dominant, but in reality, it reveals exactly the opposite. When you identify this pattern and have something minimally playable, it's time to attack without mercy. In practice, facing Strong Bad becomes a game of patience and observation. You wait for the right moment, identify if he's overconfident or pushing too hard, and then step in firmly when you have the advantage. There's no better feeling than calling his bet at the exact moment he's bluffing, or doubling the bet when you know he has a good hand and he ends up folding. That's how you dominate the table against him, turning his arrogance into chips in your pocket. If you entered poker night at the inventory wanting to leave with TF2 items, it makes no sense to sit at a table where no one has put anything valuable at stake. The game doesn't force you to accept every session that appears, so using this to your advantage is simply playing smarter. The logic behind the tip is straightforward. Every time you start a match, the game rolls to see if a character will bet a bounty item. When that doesn't happen right away, leaving and restarting is a way to force a new roll until someone shows up at the table with the item you want. It might sound repetitive, but when you're aiming for something specific, a few minutes of patience are worth much more than hours playing without any real reward on the horizon. What I find most interesting about this approach is that it puts you in control of the situation before the first card is even dealt. You aren't waiting for luck to decide if the night will be worth it. You are actively filtering until you find the match that fits your goals. And that's a form of strategy before the game even truly begins. And of course, when you finally sit at a table where the item is in play, your focus level changes completely. There's that good pressure of knowing the round matters, that every decision has real weight. For me, this is one of the best parts of bounty items in the game. They turn a common match into something much more engaging, and knowing how to ensure that happens is an advantage many people simply ignore. Ignoring table image is great because it breaks an expectation many people bring from real poker. The idea that if you are too aggressive for too long, your opponents will adapt. In this case, the smartest reading is to accept that insisting on the same pressure can keep working, and that completely changes how I would approach every round. This takes a huge weight off the player's mind. Instead of thinking, have they noticed my pattern yet? You can focus on what really matters: hand value, bet timing, and the immediate reaction of the table. To me, this even makes the game more fun because you stop treating the table as a super sophisticated psychological duel and start exploring the game almost as a system that can be manipulated consistently. The most interesting side is that it feels a bit cruel, yet very satisfying. If the AI keeps falling for the same traps even after several aggressive plays, there's no reason to abandon a strategy that's working just for fear of a counter adjustment that never comes. Personally, I would use this tip as permission to play aggressively, without guilt, repeating traps and forcing uncomfortable decisions whenever the opportunity arises. This is one of those tips that seems small, but change your entire posture at the table. You stop playing to preserve an imaginary reputation and start playing to extract value all the time. And honestly, I think that's great because it matches that classic pleasure of discovering the game was trying to look smarter than it really is, while you've already understood exactly where to press. Elimination management makes you think like a true strategist, not just a card player. Instead of simply wanting to win each hand individually, you start to see the entire table as a battlefield, where who survives is more important than who dominates early. I particularly love this approach because it turns the game into a more tactical experience, almost as if you were manipulating the events around you to simplify your own path to victory. The idea of keeping the weaker players, like Strong Bad and Max, at the table is smart because they are unpredictable and can cause massive collateral damage. Max might go all in with nothing and eliminate Tycho by pure chance. Strong Bad could bluff ridiculously and make the heavy get emotional on a terrible call. These accidents are exactly what you want because they do the dirty work for you, eliminating real threats while you conserve your chips and your patience. For me, the most satisfying part of this tip is realizing you are basically using others' chaos to your advantage. You don't have to face Tycho in a heads-up, where he becomes aggressive and hard to read, nor do you need to enter an ego war with the heavy. Instead, you allow the most chaotic characters to do what they do best: create confusion. And when the dust settles, you're left at the end against an opponent who, despite having been lucky so far, is much more predictable than the eliminated strategists. This strategy rewards patience and long-term vision. You have to hold back the urge to speed up the game and trust that the others will destroy themselves. I think this is cool because it reminds us that in poker, often the best move is to make no move at all and let the table naturally evolve into a position that favors you. When you reach the end with this level of control, it feels like you won twice. Once by eliminating the competition without getting your hands dirty, and again by taking the prize against an easier opponent to dominate. This tip is one of those that divides opinions, but let's be honest here. When you finally get a TF2 item on the table, that moment you've been waiting for so long, and then your cards simply don't cooperate in the showdown, the frustration is real. You look at the screen, seeing that the enemy hand is going to crush you, and think, no, there's no way I'm losing the heavy's cap to a streak of bad luck right now. It's at this exact moment that this technique comes into play. The solution is simpler than it seems. Before the game processes the final result of the round, you quickly close the application. You don't need to wait to see your chips disappearing or the character celebrating with your item. Just Alt-Tab, close the game, and when you come back, you're there again at the previous moment with another chance to try the same hand or wait for a better opportunity. It's what we call save scumming, and although some purists might be bothered, in practice, it's a legitimate tool when the goal is to secure that specific item. To me, this approach makes sense because Poker Night is a single-player game against AI, so you aren't hurting anyone but yourself if you want to be ultra strict with your own rules. Sometimes we have little time to play, or that specific item is the only one missing from the collection, and spending hours waiting for another chance isn't feasible. Using this technique is basically saying, I decide when it's worth the risk, and that puts you in total control of the experience. Ideally, use this with common sense, of course. If you do it all the time, the game loses a bit of the thrill of risk. But for that rare item you finally got on the table after so many restarts, or when you simply don't want to see hours of progress go down the drain because of a cruel river card, closing the game at the right time is an ace up your sleeve that every player should know. It's a last chance to fight for what's yours, and honestly, I see no problem in taking advantage of this loophole. Adjusting the buy-in is one of those things few people notice right away, but it makes a total difference in the gaming experience. I really liked it when I discovered this because it's almost like having a hidden difficulty slider in the options. If you want a more relaxed night focused on grabbing those TF2 items or just farming some achievements, playing with a low buy-in between $1,000 and $2,000 makes the opponents much looser and more passive. They give up easily on mediocre hands, and you can progress without much of a headache. Now, if you're looking for a real challenge and want to test if you truly understand how each character thinks, then just raise the buy-in to $10,000 or more. At this level, the Heavy and Tycho become different people. They get much more solid, tighter, and the whole table gains a seriousness that doesn't exist at lower stakes. It's interesting to see how this change in a single number in the menu completely transforms the dynamic between the characters. To me, this is excellent because it makes the game very versatile. If you only have half an hour free and want to guarantee a specific item, you don't need to sweat it out at a high-tension table. But if the weekend is here and you want to feel that professional poker atmosphere with opponents really demanding the best of your readings, the high buy-in delivers exactly that. It's almost like having two different games inside the same app. I personally like to switch between the two modes depending on my mood. Some days I just want to relax and watch Max do crazy things while I accumulate easy chips, and other days I want to feel the pressure of Tycho breathing down my neck every round. This tip of adjusting the buy-in is the perfect way to customize the experience to what you're looking for at that specific moment, and it makes the game feel much more alive than if it were a single rigid difficulty.